Welcome back again. Our third guest is David Landecker of the Environmental Defense Center, and he will be also telling us about his experience at Stanford. David, so far we've heard about consensus building, we have heard about knowing your clients better and tailoring your programs to their needs. I understand you want to start by talking about something that is often overlooked, which is governance, and how governance and better governance of a nonprofit can lead to better results.
Well, the session that we attended really was about governance as a board function and how the board and the staff, the executive director in particular, which was right for most of us, can work well in governing a nonprofit organization. And a lot of what they talked about is to try to get away from the conflictive model, the idea that the board is somehow the parent and the executive director is the child, and that the board's job is to watch everything that is being done and judge it and tell you where you're right and where you're wrong. And instead to move to what they called mission-driven governance, which is this idea that everything really ought to be looked at through the lens of what's the nonprofit here for? And that there ought to be a collaborative relationship between the board and the staff that is aimed at accomplishing the mission of the organization.
So much more of a partnership.
Very much so. The idea, there are legal requirements as to what a board is supposed to do. The board has some responsibilities, but I think the concept was those responsibilities shouldn't be looked at as a burden. They should be looked at as a tool. By understanding the financial picture, the board, with its experience, can really help the executive director in making the right decisions. And the executive director can go to the board and say, well, here's where I need help. Here are some of the ideas I'm looking at. Give me the benefit of your experience. But again, not for the gotcha type of look of, oh, here you made a mistake, this number's wrong. That might be useful, but what's ultimately useful is how do you use that information to meet the goals of the organization. And that requires really understanding what those goals are. And sometimes boards, don't even think about the mission statement as anything other than something we stick on our grant applications.
So what I'm hearing is that the board's primary function is really to look at the policy, look at the vision, and then help the executive director to implement that, but not necessarily to micromanage that process.
Well, as an executive director, that's certainly my point of view. Micromanagement, to expect that someone who comes to a board meeting for a couple hours a month and maybe to a committee meeting and perhaps reads a report has the ability to micromanage the organization, that's asking a lot of a board. And for a board member to think that they have that capacity isn't saying much about their respect for their executive director, who's there every day and involved in the micro issues. Being a board member is sort of a 30,000-foot view of an organization. And they can see a lot. They can see its picture in the greater community. They can see its role in trying to accomplish certain things in the community, and whether they're really doing that or not in a much better way than someone who's on the inside can. And they bring all kinds of experiences. Hopefully, if you choose your board well, and if the board chooses its partners well, you will have that great view. And one of the things that was really interesting that I know no board I've ever been on uses was the statement that choosing new board members is the most important decision that a board will make during the year. I think choosing new board members is often one of those things that is stuck at the very end of a meeting of, oh, they're willing? Okay, let's grab them. And that both executive directors and boards need to be strategic about thinking about what do they need to accomplish their objectives. And sometimes that's fundraising, but on the governance issue, what was really discussed is governance is not fundraising. It's a different function. And you might look at fundraising as something that you want to look at your board members for, But that's a different issue than the governance issue and how we run the organization.
So what I'm hearing is that governance, good governance, this kind of partnership governance is not ancillary to the work. In a sense, it must be seen as part of the work, part of the core work of an organization, really taking it seriously, and that could pay great dividends to the organization.
It's central to the work. I mean, if the board is ultimately the governing organization, why have the organization doesn't exist for the purpose of meeting government requirements or of having a great balance sheet. Those are all nice things, but ultimately the organization exists for the purpose of accomplishing a mission. And if your board isn't contributing to that goal, if the whole board staff function is not contributing to that goal, but instead perhaps diverting from that goal, then it's counterproductive. And that doesn't do anyone any good. And board members sometimes don't recognize that their goal is to serve a mission rather than to be, as I said before, parental.
I don't mean to put you on the spot, but going forward with this experience behind you, can you see something that might be done differently at your organization in this topic?
Well, I'm blessed with a good board. I'm blessed with a board that I think I have a great relationship with, and I think they understand their role and limitations, and fortunately I think they respect me and my role and the fact that I spend a lot of time there and I do know a little more about the day-to-day than they do. But I think it puts it in place, and one of the things that really struck me is the need for the board to take responsibility for governance of the board. We used to have a board governance committee. That ultimately was subsumed by the executive committee because we just, it was felt there were too many different meetings of too many different things and that the executive committee could meet this function. As I begin to look at it, I think that board self-review and reflection on the effectiveness of the board, on what kinds of new members they might need, might be better done by a separate committee. And I'm going to bring that to my board to look at as to would it be more effective to have go back to a board governance committee model rather than just having that be a sub-function of the executive committee. And I'll let them ponder whether that works or not.
But it's a fascinating concept, the issue of investing in the board in the same way as we invest in staff, as we invest in our programs, to see it as an of equal importance in running a great organization. One of the takeaways you had.
No question. And also just the idea that a board, really like a staff member, is a participant in the organization. I was sort of surprised by one of the numbers they had that less than 50% of organizations go through a board orientation for new board members, where a board member is somehow thrown into the middle of this organization and expected to understand what the culture of the organization is, what the mission really is, and sometimes our mission is a sentence that we use, and really there's a wider mission. There's a lot more things that need to be understood. The policies, just the way things are expected to happen. And that doesn't happen magically. And it really helps to spend a couple hours with a new board member and make sure they understand what they're getting into. We do that routinely, but from what I've heard, that's not uniformly done that way.
No, I think you're probably quite right. It's like joining a family or a friendship group or a new neighborhood. We need to bring people in and acclimate them to the culture and their responsibilities. Well, David, it's been a pleasure talking to you about this. I'm sure we could do it for a lot longer, but we have some time limits. So I want to thank you for sharing this time with us. And when we do return, I will not be here in this chair, but Catherine Brzezowski, Vice President of the Orfalea Foundations, will continue the interviews. Thanks.